A man writing in the 1880s, mentally collapsing, alone, described a future generation that would have no values to stand on, no purpose to wake up for, no answer to the question why. His name was Friedrich Nietzsche, and he was writing a warning. If you're part of Gen Z, or better yet, if someone close to you is, you already know that something is wrong. The numbers confirm it, the faces confirm it. That hollow scrolling, going through the motions feeling confirms it. Nietzsche saw it coming over a century before it arrived. But what exactly did he see? Why it happened, and what, if anything, can be done about it? You are about to find out. In 1888, Friedrich Nietzsche wrote a line that deserves to be read slowly. He wrote, "What I narrate is the history of the next 2 centuries. I describe what is coming, what can no longer come otherwise, the rise of nihilism." This was a prediction made with the confidence of someone who had already mapped the whole path ahead. He described European culture as moving toward catastrophe, with a tortured tension growing from decade to decade. Restless, violent, headlong, like a river rushing toward its end, no longer able to slow down and reflect. He was writing in a time of church attendance, stable social structures, and confident national identities. From the outside, things looked fine. Nietzsche saw the rot underneath. What he was diagnosing was a crisis of the entire value system the West had built. He argued that nihilism doesn't arrive as an invasion, it becomes necessary because the values a civilization holds eventually consume themselves. They follow their own logic all the way to the end, and at the end, there's nothing. When people stop believing in the system that gives their life structure and nothing replaces it, you're left with a void. And in that void, the most dangerous question a human being can face becomes unanswerable. That question is why. The thing is, Nietzsche wasn't anti-religion for fun. He was watching an inevitable unraveling and trying to warn anyone who would listen. Scholar Walter Kaufmann later wrote that Nietzsche felt the agony of a godless world so intensely at a time when others were still blind to what it would mean, that he was essentially living through in advance the fate of a generation that hadn't been born yet. He also knew that it would be gradual. He described a pattern where modern people try on one value, then another, drop them one by one, and over time the emptiness just accumulates, felt more and more acutely with each thing discarded. He was talking about a generation that wakes up one day and realizes the tank has been empty for a while. Now, if this is the kind of info that you would like to hear more about, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Nietzsche called this passive nihilism, and again, he wrote this in the 1880s. He was describing a world that didn't exist yet. But if you spent any time paying attention to this generation, you already know that world arrived. Now let's take a closer look at what actually happened. The thing is, Gen Z is the first generation in American history where more people have no religion than have one. Their grandparents' generation was 74% Christian. That world collapsed, and with it, Nietzsche's death of God stopped being a philosophical provocation and evolved into a demographic fact. However, you should know that the collapse of religious identity is only part of the picture. It's what comes after that Nietzsche was actually worried about. He was clear that nihilism is not caused by hardship or suffering. It comes from a particular framework for understanding the world collapsing and leaving no replacement behind. Losing religion doesn't automatically produce nihilism. Losing religion and replacing it with nothing does. And that is exactly what happened. The most connected generation in history, the one that grew up with the internet, with social media, with more access to information and other people than any humans who have ever lived, turned out to be the loneliest. They inherited more options than any previous generation and arrived at a pervasive sense that none of it adds up to anything. The scaffolding came down and nothing was built in its place. That is exactly what breaking looks like. A quiet, spreading inability to answer the question that matters most. Why? Why get up? Why work towards something? Why care? The anxiety, the depression, the scrolling numbness, the inability to commit to anything for long. Nietzsche saw all of it coming. He said it was the most dangerous form of collapse, precisely because it doesn't feel like a crisis. It feels like a Tuesday. The psychologist Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz and spent his career studying what keeps people alive under impossible conditions, arrived at the same conclusion from a completely different direction. He found that the prisoners most likely to survive were not the strongest physically, but the ones who still had something to live for, a reason. Gen Z lacks that reason, even though they didn't go through those troubles. Nihilism spread through Western culture produced exactly what Nietzsche forecasted, a pervasive mood of gloom, anxiety, and directionless anger. But what if I told you that he also thought about what it would take to survive it? Surviving nihilism, according to Nietzsche, had nothing to do with finding a replacement belief system. No new religion, no ideology, no structure handed down from above would solve the problem. Because the problem was precisely that people had spent centuries outsourcing the question of meaning to external authorities. Doing it again with different packaging would just restart that same cycle. What you probably don't know is that Nietzsche spent the last productive years of his life before his mental collapse in 1889 working on what he called the revaluation of all values. Think destruction as preparation. He wanted to clear the ground so something real could be built on it. Nietzsche's argument was simple. You cannot build genuine values on top of inherited ones if you no longer actually believe in them. Pretending to believe something you don't is a slow rot. The collapse had to happen, but the collapse was supposed to be followed by construction, and that construction could not come from outside. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche wrote that throughout history, people created their own values out of their own needs, their own struggles, their own understanding of what made life worth enduring. That creative act, he argued, was now the task of the individual. You. This is where his concept of the will to power becomes relevant, and it almost always is misunderstood. It has nothing to do with dominating other people. Nietzsche described it as the drive to grow, to overcome resistance, to take the raw material of your existence and shape it into something. He measured a person by how much resistance they could absorb and turn to their advantage. Suffering, failure, uncertainty, none of these were problems to be eliminated. They were the conditions under which real values get forged. Tied directly to this was another concept that he called amor fati, love of fate. Actual love of it, including the painful parts, including the parts that you would change if you could. He wrote that his formula for greatness in a human being was wanting nothing to be different. The idea was an active choice to stop spending your life in resentment toward reality and start building within it. And this is the part that speaks directly to right now. What Nietzsche was describing as the solution is precisely what the current moment makes hardest. The anxiety, the scrolling, the inability to commit. These are symptoms of nihilism, sure, but they are also defenses against the one thing that would actually help: choosing something, fully knowing that there is no guarantee it matters, and building your life around it anyway. He wrote that we would eventually need new values, completely new, built by people willing to sit with the discomfort of the void long enough to find out what they actually care about when no one is telling them what to care about. That is not easy. Nietzsche never said that it was. He said it was the hardest thing a human being could do, and that most wouldn't manage it. But he also said that those who did would represent something genuinely new, something that had never existed before. The collapse he predicted, the nihilism breaking us, was always meant to be the beginning of that story. Whether it becomes the ending entirely depends on what this generation decides to do with the emptiness that they inherited. In the end, the emptiness you feel when you ask, "What's the point?" is not a personal failure. It is a cultural inheritance. But inheriting a problem doesn't mean you're stuck with it. The way through nihilism, according to the man who predicted it, is to build an answer, intentionally, personally, out of something real. Now, if this reached something in you, drop a comment and tell us. What do you value? What would you defend if someone told you it was meaningless? That is where it starts.